Okay, recording started. So let's kick things off. Welcome everybody to this webinar on the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme. If I could remind everyone to keep their microphones on mute, just so we don't get any echoes and background noise, that'd be much appreciated. But you're all very welcome to this update on the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme as we get to an exciting stage in the project. Just as a kind of kick-off and a thank you for all our programme funders and partners and the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme, particularly the Nature Conservancy and the WWF as one of our primary funders, together with the Norfolk Councils and Anglian Water. If we move on to the first slide, we'll talk a bit about what we're going to be covering this morning, our agenda, the speakers that we've got lined up, and just a bit of a housekeeping. So just to introduce myself, I'm Daniel Johns. I'm the Managing Director of Water Resources East. The intention today, our aim is to share progress on the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme and to set ourselves up for a kind of fuller launch event in person when we get to September. And we'll explain a little bit more about that when the time comes. We've got a really packed agenda, got a great lineup of speakers from the project team, a lot of ground to cover, but we'll have to be quite disciplined in terms of making sure we stick to time and to make sure we've got enough time for questions and answers as we go through. We're intending to use the chat function for any questions you want to raise, so just kind of post questions to the chat as you go through. And then when we get to the Q&A section at the end of each presentation, I'll obviously draw from those, but also might invite people to come in if they're willing to raise their hand and to unmute themselves. But as I say, keep yourselves on mute for the time being, and we'll get going. If we could just move to the agenda slide. So kicking us off will be Luke, the Programme Manager for the Norfolk Water Strategy, gives us an introduction to the day. Jack, Thomas and Lola for the Nature for Water facility will be talking through the modelling, the kind of technical work underpinning the Norfolk Water Strategy, and then the financial modelling underpinning the strategy to help build the business case that will be launching formally in September. And then Rob from the Nature Conservancy will be talking about those implementation issues. How do we actually make the Norfolk Water Strategy fly in practice? What are the kind of delivery implementation challenges we are seeking to overcome, and what our way forward will be. Now we've got lots of people on the call. Just be quite interesting to see who you all are, where you all are at this time. So if you want to use the chat function just to introduce yourself, type in the organisation you represent, maybe where you are in the country or around the world, and what your interest is within the Norfolk Water Strategy. That would just be really interesting and help colour the session for everybody else. But let's crack on, lots to cover. So Luke, do you want to take us through into the introduction?
Yeah, thanks Daniel, and hi everyone, Luke Waterman, Programme Manager at Water Resources East. And yeah, just a handful of slides just to kind of introduce the programme or reintroduce the programme to some of you who perhaps haven't engaged too much since last year. And I guess probably the best place to start is really kind of the work we set out last year, which was our kind of progress report, which is publicly available online on WRE's website, and that really aimed to kind of set out the kind of water security challenges in Norfolk, the role that nature-based solutions could play to address some of those challenges, and some of the challenges around funding and scaling investment into NBS. And I think it's important to say that through that process, we engaged quite a lot of stakeholders over a few months, and the kind of key message that we got back from many of those stakeholders was that in terms of the range of water security challenges that we should primarily be focusing on, the idea of water resources and water quality stood out at that point. So those are the two challenges that we've really focused on since last year. In terms of water resources, we've got issues around flow compliance on many water bodies. We're experiencing the increasing impacts of climate change and drought, and abstractors are really seeing challenges around licenses and their impact on the environment as well. And in terms of the impact more generally, we're seeing risk to the ecology, which are dependent on fresh water, and I guess challenges for abstractors who need water for all of their different economic purposes in Norfolk. In terms of water quality, we've got, as many know, we've got kind of challenges around diffuse pollution, point source pollution impacting important headwaters and sensitive water bodies, and obviously many of these are failing as a result of standards such as the Water Framework Directive or stricter standards. And a lot of this has resulted in, and as I'm sure many are aware of nutrient neutrality in the county of Norfolk. So which has typically kind of stored housing and planning for well over a year, and there's a real need to kind of mobilise mitigation for nutrients on that front. In terms of addressing those water security challenges, we've been really focused on thinking about how nature-based solutions can play a role, and I guess it's important to say that in a UK context, there's a lot of clear policy drivers and guidance now that are really advocating for nature-based solutions to address these challenges. So we're seeing lots of really clear appetite on that side. On the other side, I think it's fair to say we're all increasing our collective understanding of all the different investment mechanisms that we can start to leverage to, I guess, increase and stimulate private forms of investment into nature-based solutions as well. In terms of this program and our approach to change, on one side, we've got this kind of top-down business planning approach. So really thinking about what a portfolio of nature-based solutions does look like to address some of these water security challenges. What are the costs and benefits of some of those? How do we go around identifying sources of funding, and what does the practicalities of implementation mean for that? And those things you can see on the left-hand side are some of the things that we're looking to share today. On the other hand, we're continuing to progress a lot of our work on demonstrator projects. So these projects are going to be really important to think about how we kind of improve our understanding of the practicalities of many of the concepts that we talk about. So things such as engaging with environmental markets, contracting in perpetuity, compensation for landowners. How do these things really work in practice? And that's really going to be the focus of our demonstrator projects. And one great example of demonstrator projects that we're working on is an estate on the eastern side of Norwich. And that's we're just kicking off a series of feasibility and baselining for the next 12 to 18 months. And that's a part of WWF's NBS Accelerator program, which primarily aims to get a lot of these high quality NBS projects to investment ready over the course of the next 18 months. So really exciting to be kicking off that project with a handful of partners, which is great to see for partnership working. And as Daniel said, many thanks to WWF for continuing to support this program. I guess whilst we'd love to do more and more great demonstrator projects and kick off more of this work, what I guess we're increasingly seeing in the landscape is, I guess, a series of barriers for nature-based solutions, both on the supply side. So the likes of landowners and the NGOs and those who can offer up the means of change for NBS, but also barriers on the demand side for NBS. So the likes of beneficiaries or investors who are looking to mobilize this. So many barriers such as who takes the risk on investment, how do we get projects to investment ready, or perhaps from the landowner perspective, what should I do on my land? Is my land in the right location to offer up the right type of benefits? How do I find buyers for these services? Quite a lot of questions that consistently come up. And I guess just to address many of those barriers and questions, overcoming those barriers, it's important just to kind of recognise that the kind of two main overarching recommendations from this program, which we've been working on since last year, is on one side, so a blended investment vehicle, so the Norfolk Water Fund, which primarily aims to, I guess, increase funding, really stimulate those forms of private investment, really understands how we can manage risk and potentially explore things like cost efficiencies and multiple outcomes. And then secondly, a collaborative action platform, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, but a platform, a suite of resources to really think about how can we unlock the NBS project pipeline, what types of guidance and project incubation can we offer up to landowners and the NGO? Where is there a place where we can just consistently build the evidence base? So those are recommendations which we're keen to share more about today. And as Daniel said, we've got a handful of speakers just to talk through some of these key elements, and they're going to go through some of that now. So Daniel, I'll just hand back to you and let you hand over to the next speaker.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's a superb introduction. Thank you, Luke. And I think let's just crack straight on to Jack. So you can take us through the technical modelling underpinning the modelling of nature-based solutions. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hello everybody. So I'm Jack Beard. I work for Future Water and the Nature for Water facility. And I've been looking at all things kind of modeling GIS for the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme. So I've been coordinating a number of kind of work streams around this and just thinking about, what are the things that make for good implementation of nature-based solutions, what's the kind of opportunities to implement, and what does that look like in terms of what they can deliver for wider ecosystem services benefits. So first of all, kind of the objectives here, and I should say that we're really talking about a kind of, in this webinar, we're talking about the kind of top-down view of nature-based solutions and prioritizing a kind of top-down portfolio of nature-based solutions across a number of catchments in Norfolk. That kind of fits in with that bottom-up approach by just having an idea of what's the total opportunity for delivery of NBS, where are kind of places to act in the landscape, and what are we kind of aiming for? What are our targets for delivery? What can that deliver in terms of ecosystem services? How much is it going to cost? All of these sorts of things. So the objectives, especially of this prioritization modeling, are thinking about what does an investable portfolio of NBS look like at kind of the catchment scale, thinking about what features are the kind of ideal features for achieving the water resources and water quality goals that Luke's already talked about, and then thinking about dynamics of implementation benefits. So if we implement more, are we necessarily going to get more benefits, or other kind of curves, are the kind of natural ceilings to the benefits that you can achieve with these sorts of features. So what we really want to get out of this at the end is an idea of kind of a spatially explicit portfolio and an idea of how much land that's going to need and what are the ecosystem services delivered, which then plugs into the whole costing side, which Thomas will talk a little bit more about, which is thinking about how much does this cost and what are the benefits economically that we can have out of these. This is kind of a short overview. And from the top, I want to acknowledge the hard work as well, which is fed into a lot of what we've done from the guys at JBA and the Environment Agency, because a lot of their work, I know there's a number of them on the call, and yeah, their work's really been invaluable in terms of getting this structure. So first of all, the work that we've done is about opportunity mapping. So that's about thinking about where are NBS best placed in the landscape. The outputs of that are these biophysical opportunity maps for different NBS features. That's thinking about where are things best placed according to topography, according to things like land use. That's already done. We have the outputs for that. The second part was, again, this work by JBA, which was looking at nature-based solutions and water resources modeling. And that was looking at the start of the program, we were kind of still wondering whether nature-based solutions can have the kind of water resources outcomes that we'd hope for in terms of augmenting low flows, increasing infiltration, all of that sort of stuff. So that modeling really helped us get to grips with the question, kind of the primary question of, can NBS make a difference in terms of water resources? And then lastly, those two processes fed into the prioritization modeling, which is underway at the moment, and that's looking at, okay, for a given kind of amount of implementation, where are the best places to put NBS? What's the delivery against water resources? But then also, what's the delivery against the water quality outcomes that we want to see, and the kind of monetizable flows in terms of biodiversity net gain and nutrient neutrality. So it's trying to bring together all of those things and have an idea of what that portfolio can achieve. The outputs of which will be kind of this prioritized NBS portfolio and some idea of the kind of cost benefit around that. Yeah, this is just to get an idea of kind of what we're hoping to achieve. Some people will have already seen this, but it's this idea of kind of increasing base flows, improving water availability in times of water scarcity, and then also attenuating high flows in terms of yeah, we might see kind of nutrient-rich runoff there. So it's really thinking about the water resources component, but it's also thinking about the kind of sponge functioning of the landscape is the way that I like to see it. The types of NBS that we've considered here, I've kind of split this down a bit from what Luke showed you earlier in terms of calling it edge of field and infield interventions. So this is thinking about, and the message here is we want to work, a lot of these features naturally fit into places which are kind of soggy, potentially not that productive anyway. So they're the edge of field interventions for sure. And that's thinking about these places are already potentially not that productive. So potentially farmers, landowners, those sorts of people might want to take them out of production for expanding buffer areas or installing these runoff attenuation features that we're talking about. We're also thinking about in-field soil management, potentially the very targeted conversion of land to grassland. And why these NBS? First of all, we've shown a little bit that they can potentially have positive impacts on water resources, but they're also able to be funded through nutrient neutrality, funded through biodiversity net gain, and bring in those revenues for the implementation. Last of all, very importantly as well, is the kind of positive outcomes for nature. So we think that these can really kind of expand existing priority networks and buffer them. So trying to think about, you know, how we can expand from existing priority habitat areas and how we can increase the kind of buffering areas around those, because these are naturally quite linear features. Just a quick word on rafts. So we've had a lot of questions around what runoff attenuation features are previously. And what you can see on the left is a conceptualization from the guys at JBA. This is the idea of in-channel rafts and then on-field rafts. So it's kind of, some of them will be placed in fields. We're talking things like scrapes, and then some would potentially be in drainage networks. What we have on the right is a really nice example that we saw done by Norfolk Rivers Trust with a landowner, and that was looking at installing these sediment traps in the drainage network. And what they do really nicely is they create attenuation areas, which allows for the natural kind of settling of nutrient-rich sediment, but also creates kind of infiltration areas. So I think you can imagine a kind of cascading network of these features where you're removing nutrients, but you're also trying to get infiltration into the groundwater. When we're talking about the spatial extents of the modelling, we're talking about the Wensum, the Bure, and the Yare. And the reason for that is, number one, we did some water security challenges mapping, reviewing openly available data sets and finding which catchments have the highest kind of need for water security challenges and NBS. And also there was some work on whereabouts we'd be able to achieve kind of delivery against nutrient neutrality. And these are the nutrient neutrality areas. You can see we've got the Broads SACs and then also the River Wensum SAC within these catchments. So the first of that kind of flow that I showed was opportunity mapping. And this is this idea that it's looking at kind of the top-down catchment scale delivery opportunity to deliver nature-based solutions. So it's thinking about where in the landscape do these interventions fit. The types of interventions that we've looked at are flood zone interventions. So that's kind of things within the floodplain, and also thinking about floodplain reconnection. It's riparian zone, so around natural and artificial drainage networks. Can we buffer? Can we kind of increase the vegetative cover there? And then also thinking about naturally occurring storage areas within the catchment. So that's this catchment storage areas and runoff attenuation features. This work again was done by JBA, and I think the results are really nice in terms of, number one, it gives you an idea of the kind of total potential for delivery across these areas. But number two, it also gives a kind of bottom-up way of looking at, okay, we have a project, we know that there's a landowner that's potentially willing to implement some features on their land. It's a good way of getting a first idea of what kind of features fit into that landscape naturally. So you can see here we've got a number of fields, and you can see there's natural storage areas, but there's also areas that you could prioritize for kind of buffering, for runoff attenuation. These data sets we're hoping to be made available through some sort of data portal, but that's kind of that's upcoming. The second part was, again, this water resources modeling. Now, I don't really want to completely murder the message here because I know the guys are on the call. But I think the main message in terms of our program is, in answer to that question of can NBS have a significant impact on kind of water resources, the answer is, when you target the right nature-based solutions in the right places, the answer is yes, in terms of Q95 flows, but also in terms of increasing infiltration to groundwater. So we showed not only that, you know, you can have a positive impact, get more water into the aquifers, but we've also shown through the use of the NEAC model, which is a mod flow groundwater model, that that water does show up in terms of flows in chalk streams. So on the left, there's the River Wensum. Well, the table is for the River Wensum, and you can see that a variety of the kind of portfolios or scenarios that have been modelled, runoff attenuation features being at the bottom. There's been a kind of depending on what we're looking at, there is a potential to achieve, up to 50% implementation of all the places where you could put SRAFs and CRAFs. You can potentially, have 8 to 15% increase in low flows at Q95, according to this modelling. So that's a really nice result for us in terms of showing that NBS potentially can have this impact that we want to see. So the third part is this full prioritization modeling that we're currently working on at the moment. And this is, again, this idea of, giving a kind of user input in terms of, we want this many hectares of, let's say, riparian zone buffers. We want this many hectares of soil management, and thinking about, okay, if we implement that and take it all the way through these steps that I show here, what's the impacts in terms of water resources, but also in terms of biodiversity net gain and delivery against nutrient neutrality. So the way that we've done that is we've used the opportunity maps. We've thought about where are kind of the best places to put those. And then using this priority ranking methodology, I can say, okay, if we want to do 100 hectares of riparian zone restoration, it will give me the 100 best places to implement that riparian zone restoration. And then what that can do is then feed into the ecosystem services modeling, which then says, okay, this is the delivery against all of these things. And eventually all of this becomes plugged into Thomas's clever economic models and gives us an idea of how much does this cost, what are the benefits in terms of ecosystem services. And yeah, you can start thinking about cost benefit. This is some very kind of dummy outputs, so don't take these at all as the final results, but it's just an idea of the sort of things that we'll be able to do. So we'll be able to look at, on the left, percentage delivery, and then that will give us the number of those things delivered, the land area take in terms of hectares, but also in terms of total percentage of the catchment. And then you'll have the delivery against things like biodiversity net gain, reduced runoff for nutrient neutrality, and then also against some water resources metrics as well. So what that will give us come the business plan launch is a kind of fully costed top-down portfolio of NBS and the spatially explicit ecosystem services that will be delivered by that. So what we mean by that is, okay, we'll be able to say, we want to deliver this many hectares of soil management. We want to deliver this many runoff attenuation features. What that will give us is this delivery against biodiversity net gain, nutrient neutrality, and water resources. And it will cost this much. That's really the idea. So in terms of working on that, that involves keeping working on the prioritization modeling, thinking about the kind of cost benefit side of things that Thomas is going to talk about shortly. After that, we would really like to refine this methodology because we think it's a really useful one for being able to kind of plan what we want in terms of what we want for these catchments. So what the interventions should be, how much it's going to cost, and what the benefits can be. So I think in future, we'd really like to create a kind of more flexible modeling tool. So that would be thinking about, okay, if we implement these NBS, these are the benefits in terms of things like what we already have, but then also things around wider water quality outputs. So if we implement this, what are going to be the kind of water quality outcomes along the River Wensum, for example. At the moment, all we have is the reduction in nutrient export from land, but that doesn't necessarily give us the kind of spatially explicit water quality picture. The other thing we'd really like to know is, what are the impacts here on biodiversity? How can we better align with things like LNRS? So it's just working with a probably a number of people who are on this call to try and think about how do we take this tool further? How do we make it deliver against what we want? And how do we integrate it with these visions for the catchments that we're talking about, the Wens and the Bure, the Yeah. Potentially that means, yeah, as I say, chiming in with the LNRS, chiming in with things like the catchment plans. There's a variety of ways that we could go with this. And I think that is everything from me. So we're on Q&A now.
Brilliant, Jack. Thank you so much. If you want to just drop the slides. And
Yep.
yeah, so just to keep encouraging people to put questions into the chat, we'll run through those in a minute. We've also got a hand up as well, so if we've got time, we'll turn to them. And also, if you joined the call since we started, then do introduce yourself in the chat. Just explain what your role is, what your interest is, and also where in the world you are. I think we've got one person joining us from Kenya, which is really exciting. And we've also had Adam Brown join us from WWF, which unfortunately, Adam, you missed both credits for WWF in supporting the programme. So just to say how much we appreciate your support for this programme and for the project that Luke briefly touched upon. And on that vein, so Amy, you just mentioned a project that I think you're in touch with the landowner around Hellington Beck, and just to flag that we're always looking for new candidate projects, new pilots where we can work with landowners in the ways that Jack and Luke have described already. So if you know of willing landowners who want to try things, look into different sources of funding to diversify their business, then do put us in touch with them. Right, turning to the questions, Ian Robinson asked a question about peat soils, which Rob, I think you had a go answering, but just want to pick that up. So the question is whether or not we're looking particularly at peat restoration. I suppose obviously a hot topic at the moment, not just because of net zero, but the launch last week of the Lowland Peat Agricultural Task Force, and perhaps we might dwell on some of the recommendations in a moment. But Rob?
Yeah, well, just to say we haven't modelled that from a top-down perspective, but when as projects are developed, if there are local opportunities around peat, then obviously we would that's something we'd encourage landowners to be looking at, and I think there's space. We can talk a little bit about the hub later about how do we actually represent where those opportunities are and signpost the guidance to help bolster those opportunities and drive people to access those opportunities. Certainly the experience in the Wendling Beck pilot project has been that the peat mapping that's out there isn't particularly accurate. So obviously there are areas of extensive lowland peat in Norfolk and East Anglia, which is more, where we have pretty robust evidence. But in terms of kind of the kind of river corridors and small pockets, it's not particularly brilliant. So yeah, it's not been a major focus, but we're definitely up for a conversation around that.
Yeah, and it is a major focus for the Broads Authority, and we've got Marie-Pierre on the call, and they've got various pilots underway where they're testing different types of, pluviculture in one example, working closely with the Water Management Alliance as the internal drainage board for the area. And just to kind of, again, flag the Lowland Peat Task Force report if you've not read it, because as well as accepting all 14 of the task force's recommendations, there's new pots of money available, including to some explicitly for IDB to test new ways of managing water levels much more intelligently, so that you kind of store carbon in the soils, you avoid wind and soil erosion. And so there's lots of potential, as Rob says, to kind of tie that in later stages of the project. Marie-Pierre also asked a question about how we're tying what we're doing in with the local nature recovery strategy, which of course now all authorities across England have been tasked to complete over the next kind of 18 months or so. Luke, do you want to say a bit more about how this might tie together?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've had quite a few good meetings with the likes of Sherry Harper, James Fisher, those sorts of people from Norfolk County Council, and yeah, there's a really good understanding about how we could potentially supplement the work on the local nature recovery strategies. I think it's fair to say I think a lot of the kind of focus around data and mapping has been quite terrestrial based in the past. So I think there's a real value add here in terms of what we could share for water outcomes. So absolutely.
And there is just a point, just a clarification for you, Jack, around the area in hectares. It seems quite a lot bigger than people expecting.
I've just answered. I've got the the units are off. Is meters squared, I think. So then that should be a 10,000 conversion.
Okay, good spot then.
So great spot.
Okay, and in Jelly, so AI, what role can AI play in this space to increase the impact or scale of the benefits? So they're looking at AI to benefit the NGO sector. Interested to learn from people about how AI can influence the project. Have we thought about that? So is that for you, Jack, perhaps?
Yeah, I was dreading you coming to me on that one, actually. I'm not sure that we've thought explicitly how AI could influence this. I think a really nice one, a nice application would be kind of, you know, your remote sensing and thinking about land management. So understanding when potentially land is bare, flagging that, thinking about whether that could be a mechanism for contacting people and saying, you know, in terms of soil management, maybe this is a good time to be putting in cover crops, that sort of thing. I know that's potentially something that the guys at UEA have worked on. Maybe they mentioned. I think we've got Kevin on the line who'd know more about that.
Yeah. And so there's lots of other projects going on which we need to tie into, not just the local nature recovery strategy, exploiting all the modelling that you mentioned, JBA, Environment Agency are rather up to. Nick from Natural England mentions the Renew project that Net Zero East are working on, which is looking at how you can exploit the internal drainage board networks to move water to where it's needed most for abstractors, particularly for energy, obviously for industry, potentially for agriculture as well. We're a partner organisation at Water Resources East with Net Zero East. We're working side by side on that, and also just to welcome Tom Sayer. So Tom is the General Manager of Norfolk Environmental Credit. So this is a new joint venture between Norfolk County Council, planning authorities and Anglian Water, I believe, which is there to create and kind of support a market in nutrient neutrality credits to support house building, but hopefully if those credits are delivered in ways which, well, are nature-based ways, they will deliver much wider benefits for the environment. So Tom, if there's an excuse to bring you in later, I'll be pleased to do so. But we probably should move on unless there's any other burning questions. I think we probably should. So Jack, I think you're going to be sharing, sorry, not Jack, sorry, Thomas, yeah, you're sharing your slides first and kicking off this next session. So over to you.
Yes. Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. I'm Thomas Curtis. I work with the Nature for Water facility, and along with Lola, we'll walk you through our approach to building the business case and to funding the program. So really the objective with building a business case is to create a tool for decision making. We want to try to provide important stakeholders, landowners, potential financiers, the tools to make decisions in supporting financially the program. And we want to do it in a different ways. We want to first estimate the value of nature-based solutions for water security for the Norfolk economy, and also assess the potential revenue streams from monetization of ecosystem services. Jack mentioned BNGs and nutrient neutrality offsets. We want also to perform a cost-benefit analysis so that we can inform the cost effectiveness of different portfolios of nature-based solutions and make recommendations really on preferred options in Norfolk. And last, we want to be able to size the funding needs of those different portfolios and to try and assess what's possible to do with a specific budget so that we can support the fundraising strategy. So I'll be brief with the methodology. I don't want to bore you with a lot of details, but really we are going to take in what Jack is providing us in terms of biophysical outputs, try to assess the benefits for Norfolk and the revenue streams, compare that to the costs, and that would lead us to the cost benefit ratios and uses and sources, meaning the funding needs. So I'll just detail that in a bit more so that you can understand what we are going to do or what we are going to assess and what we're not going to assess at this stage. So for the first part, I won't repeat what Jack already said, but let me get my pointer here, but really highlight that from Jack's models, we'll have key metrics such as low flow, such as additional infiltration, will have also benefits in terms of ecosystem services in terms of water quality, and derive from that a number of offsets for phosphorus and nitrogen. We want to also assess the hectares of new habitat created and what type of habitat created, and derive from that the BNG units that are going to be created. And so we, based from those biophysical inputs, we want to do an economic assessment of the benefit to the Norfolk economy. So for water quantity, we're doing that right now. We're trying to assess what's the value of additional flows, or to maintain or to increase flows, and to increase infiltration in the landscape. So trying to, especially for the agricultural sector, trying to assess the value of that additional cubic meter in the landscape. For water quality, we are going to try and capture that through the value of unlocking housing development for the Norfolk economy. And for biodiversity, even though at large for the Norfolk economy, we won't put a monetary value in front of the number of hectares of new habitat created. We want to be able to showcase the extent of that new creation of habitats, and also the type of habitats that are going to be created. So that's on the one hand for the benefits to the Norfolk economy. And also what's important is to try and see how this can be monetized, and how this can contribute to funding the program. So for water quantity, we have not at this stage modeled monetization of ecosystem services. We'll do it at a later stage after September to try and get into the nitty-gritty of payment for ecosystem services schemes for particular beneficiaries or water users in the landscape. Obviously, a lot of work to do with Anglian water to try and put a dollar value to that additional water in the landscape. So that's for next stage. But right now, what we are going to do is obviously to value the revenue streams from the sale of nutrient neutrality offsets, and also value the ecosystem services, or the that can be monetized through BNG. So biodiversity net gains, helping us funding the project. So this will sum to the benefits of the proposed nature-based solution portfolio. And in front of that, we are going to assess the costs. Obviously, the cost of implementing and maintaining the nature-based solutions that we've described, and that includes also monitoring, sometimes necessary, particularly for nutrient neutrality, necessary to be able to claim those offsets. So implementation and maintenance on the one hand, and programmatic costs on the other hand, establishing the water fund, running the water fund, all that is needed for fund scale monitoring and evaluation. So with that, we have the portfolio costs, and that leads us to a cost benefit analysis at Norfolk scale, and sizing a funding need for the program. As an example of outputs, I've used this graph of a project that we've assessed at pre-feasibility a while ago. That was a project that was focusing on nutrient neutrality and BNGs. What I want you to see in this slide is the process rather than the numbers, but it's trying to see the different costs, how they are balanced out by the different benefits, and obviously what's the net present value or of the program, of the portfolio in which we invest, and the project cost benefit. So in this case, we would be concluding that for each pound invested, the project generates 3.6 pounds in benefits. Again, these are numbers from a pre-feasibility high-level assessment of a project. So I hope overall at Norfolk Landscape it will be in the same scale, but we'll find out as we progress. And yes, with that, I'll pass it on to Lola. She's going to talk to you about the funding strategy. Lola,
Great.
please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Thomas. So yeah, I'm a consultant as well at the Nature for Water facility, and I've been mainly supporting Thomas on the business case, excuse me, on the business case analysis and also on the funding strategy. So the funding strategy is mainly trying to achieve three things. Firstly, it will help to identify or aim to identify and prioritize the potential funding and financing sources. Secondly, it will aim to plan an approach to engage the potential funders. And thirdly, it will aim to formulate the funding gap. So yeah, a specific funding gap of what we need and matching the specific sources with the users. So that you can see this is in italics, and this is because it's still work in progress. But let me talk to you about these three elements in a bit more detail. So we've put a lot of work initially into, apologies, trying to identify the funding and financing sources. And you can see that the sources can broadly be categorized into four main groups on the left-hand side. So on the one hand, we have regulated markets. So this will mainly be from housing and infrastructure developers looking to offset the impact on biodiversity and nutrient neutrality, so water quality, through credits. And the Water Fund would be entering that market and wrap services around that. So we've identified 37 potential sources, so housing and infrastructure developers in this case, relevant and active in the region. The next group would be public grants. So there's a lot of funding available from the Environment Agency, but also the Norfolk County Council, specifically for nature-based solutions, as well as specific community outcomes. So here we have currently identified 20 potential sources, but this is obviously something we'll keep assessing as well, and hopefully we'll be able to identify more there too. The next section is private investments. So this would include NBS financiers, such as impact investors, and for example, some of the foundations also have kind of upfront finance available and work in that manner. It could also include water and utilities companies and agricultural and supply chain actors. And in this category, we've actually identified 109 potential sources. And then the last group would be private and philanthropy grants. So this again could come from agricultural supply chain actors or other corporates that have certain CSR initiatives running, or NGOs, charities, or foundations. And there we have identified 118 different sources. So you can see a lot of work has gone into really trying to understand where that money comes from or could come from. Just moving on to the next slide, please. And then we have also done a lot of work around trying to understand the different mechanisms by which we could link the water quality and water resources outcomes we're creating with those funding sources. And you can see in the middle, I mean, this could take the shape of credits, of payments for ecosystem services. So, for example, a water and utilities company might want to pay for a specific ecosystem service that we would generate. It could also be in form of grant money for a specific conservation outcome or other outcome, or through repayable finance. And it will be very important, or at the heart of our engagement approach, is to, on a one-to-one basis, try and understand what is the most suitable financing mechanisms to match those different sources with the value that we're adding and the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. So generally, to the approach that we'll be taking to fundraising, there's kind of two different approaches that will be running in parallel in the future. Hopefully, this is our ambition. But you can see on the left, so far what we've been doing is what we call a bottom-up approach. And this really kind of ties in with what you've heard from Luke and Jack as well, is we have specific pilot projects that we're working with, and we've been fundraising against those. So matching specific outcomes that these projects achieve with the funding sources. And the benefit of this approach is really that there's a lot of certainty around the scope of the project and specific outcomes that it achieves. So funders generally like that. So there is a lot of funding available for nature-based solutions and for those outcomes as well. So it's generally a very effective approach, but it's really hard to scale that approach and use it on a wider scale. So really we have the ambition to in the future hopefully mature into a top-down approach, where we would get funders and financiers to commit finance upfront into a central pot of money that will be coordinated and then distributed from there towards a wider set of portfolios. And then, for example, a call for proposal could help to actually generate more of those projects. This would have the benefit that we can scale it more easily and also would give us more flexibility on how we can deploy those funds. So yeah, hopefully this is our strategy to move towards a top-down approach in the future. Next slide, please. And then to the last point of the 3 goals is what we really want to land at is a very specific funding gap, again, for both the top-down and bottom-up approach. So whether that's for an individual project or for the overall fund, what we want to have is a clear numerical value for the different costs that we're incurring. And on the right-hand side, you can see the different funding and revenue streams that we're looking to quantify as well, and then match them. And you can see as well here in yellow is what is the funding gap. This is currently work in progress. A lot of the outputs from the business case will help to formulate this gap, and then again with the project specifically, we'll have to work with those to then specifically calculate those gaps. Next slide, please. So leading up in terms of the engagement approach, what we're looking to do is there's obviously a big deadline coming up in September 2023 with the launch event, and leading up to this, we will be looking to do a lot of desk-based research and kind of do some light touch engagement with some of the identified stakeholders to really understand what is the appetite for a potential top-down approach, but also what are the funding mechanisms that they require, and how can this all be done. So a lot of research is happening now up until September, as well as kind of finalizing the funding gap calculations. And then the launch event itself, we actually would like to leverage as a fundraising event as well. So we really want to drum up some interest from funders by sharing the calculations and the analysis outputs that we have achieved. And then thereon, after, we would really like to follow up through one-to-one engagement and look to lock in some of those fundings and get some of the commitment tied up then. So yeah, this is broadly the approach that we're taking. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Rob.
I think we've got time for some Q&A. Actually, you don't get off that lightly, Lola. Yes, we've got some Q&A in the chat, so keep your questions coming. I was going to start off with my own, if I can, I guess probably for Thomas, about stacking risk. So in your waterfall chart, you showed how obviously the cost of implementation then released the ability to sell some of the credits of those projects, both for BNG and then for nutrient neutrality, and presumably for things like carbon as well. If there's some carbon credits, you might be able to stack. But I guess one risk is it clear yet how and the kind of terms of by which you can stack those kind of benefits to avoid any kind of claim that we might be, selling the same credits twice? Can we definitely show additionality that we are actually delivering the benefits that we claim we are? Is policy clear on that yet? What are the risks?
Yes, thank you. So for nutrient neutrality and BNG, the latest is that it is possible to stack, and hence our approach. So I'm not aware of any real risk in that one. It's been cleared recently, although it might change. Carbon, however, and you've seen it's not part of the flow of analysis. Carbon is a concern, and as we understand at this stage, may be challenging for stacking. So it's not something that we've considered, and we'll probably try to do so in the future. But right now, there is a risk associated to that.
Okay. And just whilst you're on, actually, so Lindsay asks a question about have we assessed, it might be actually for Jack as well, have we assessed the impact on food production from this kind of land use change? From a financial perspective, is that factored into the economic analysis? And I guess from a technical perspective, if we were to see a shift in land use of the scale that you're talking about, Jack, is that material at a kind of either a local, regional, or national level? So Thomas first.
Yeah, I'll take the first part of that question. So what we're trying to do now, and that's work in progress, and it's not an easy task, to be honest, is to try and see what's the additional value of that of water to agricultural production. So if you can maintain irrigation against a scenario where you have restrictions in abstractions, then there is a value to that, and it's not directly, it's indirectly, sorry, food production in a sense, but we have not factored in the equation the change of like if we were transitioning to agroforestry, for example, the value of that new type of crop versus the existing crop. That's not something that's been taken into account. What we're trying to do really now is to assess for the farming industry, for the agricultural sector, the value of being able to maintain abstraction and to keep irrigating.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Jack, yeah, so of the scale we're talking about here, is it material? And I guess I guess it depends on what kind of land we're changing. If it's not particularly productive land that we're shifting to a more kind of environmentally sustainable situation, so what's your sense?
Yeah, I think Rob actually answered this really nicely in the chat, but just to kind of reiterate, I think the way that we've designed a lot of the targeting things means that it will be targeted towards the kind of areas of land which potentially aren't so productive anyway. So your kind of soggy corners is the way we've called it a lot of the time, but yeah, just areas where water naturally accumulates and where potentially farmers would be, having to kind of excessively drain them, or potentially not having that good, potentially the land isn't that productive anyway. So I think there's an interesting thing about, us targeting land take in those sort of areas. I think potentially gives farmers the opportunity to kind of diversify their income while still maintaining food production at kind of potentially slightly reduced levels, but realistically I wouldn't have said there's going to be a huge impact in terms of that.
Yeah. Okay. And a question for Lola about the different types of funders. You touched on this a little bit about the difference between kind of debt funders, repairable finance methods. I suppose there's also some kind of that initial loss funders as well. Have you done that kind of analysis as well on top of where the different sources might be coming from? See, Lola, your camera's off. I don't know if you're still there. Maybe we'll come back to you in a minute. Actually, so let's turn to a question from Adam about nutrient neutrality, which is in the press again. Just rumours that there may be some way legislatively to unpick nutrient neutrality requirements. I don't know what Natural England might think of that, but certainly, any thoughts? I don't know.
I'll take that one.
Go on, Rob, go on.
I should imagine Natural England do have some thoughts, but they might not want to express them. But I'm unshackled. So the rumours. There are lots of rumours around. The headlines are kind of, PM seeking to, undo nutrient neutrality. The ENDS report that I read, which I assume is a fairly reputable source, was talking about the PM looking for an amendment which would allow the future upgrades of sewage treatment works, which are due in 2030, to be counted now. So on the basis that these new developments will be now in Norfolk, in some nutrient neutral catchments, these upgrades to technically achievable limits for sewage treatment works will create headroom for development to go ahead, and therefore will do away with nutrient neutrality. In Norfolk, the situation is slightly different, because actually even with those upgrades in place, the sites will still be failing to meet their water quality standards according to the modelling that's been done. So actually, even if that amendment went through, there would still be demand for nutrient neutrality. It would just be the total quantum of nitrogen and phosphorus required for house building would reduce.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's really good. Sorry,
good to
Jack,
say as well that is still a substantial amount.
Yeah.
That's one thing that's identified in the report by Royal Haskoning on that, and yeah, even with that reduction, it's still substantial, the need.
Okay, great. All right. I think Lola's might having technical issues. She's might be in the lobby, but let's ask a question from Mary Pierre about monitoring, because clearly nature-based solutions, they might have different performance year to year. Obviously, you need to monitor them quite carefully. There's expense involved in that monitoring regime. Who's best to answer that question about to what extent we've thought clearly about what monitoring will be required and be able to deal with that inter-year variability?
Yeah, so I just posted an answer to that. But very quickly, it really depends on the type of intervention and the evidence that already exists. Some interventions, you can build a baseline based just on modeling. And so you'd be able to claim a certain amount of credits based on modeling without monitoring. For other interventions where the evidence is not that clear, you need to build a baseline with monitoring prior to be able to claim credits, to claim offsets, and to receive payments for nutrient neutrality. And in any case, if you want to go beyond what you've calculated in your baseline, say you factored in an uncertainty and you're claiming just 50% of all the nutrient neutrality offsets that you think you can claim. If you want to go to 100% or whatever percentage, you need to go and do in-field monitoring to be able to demonstrate those benefits and to claim those additional offsets. And there are guidelines in terms of what needs to be done. You need to take samples monthly, plus a number of things that I won't go into details. But yeah, we've thought about this, and it can be very costly. So one of the questions we have is like maybe we should for a couple of projects build strong evidence and monitor whether or not we want to claim more credits.
Okay, brilliant. I can see, Lola, you're having a few technical challenges, but we probably should move on. But maybe, Lola, if you could take a look at Adam's question about separating out debt repayable finance from revenue generating source of finance as well. And there's also a question from Simon Whiteman from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation about where you've got benefits which are less easily monetizable. Does that kind of skew what you're doing and kind of leave you to a kind of lowest common denominator approach, I suppose, to nature-based solutions? So perhaps, Jack, if you could answer that in the question in the chat, maybe, or Thomas. But we should move on. Rob, I think you're up next to talk about kind of some of the delivery challenges and making this happen. So over to you, Rob.
Okay, let me see if right, is that visible?
Not yet.
Hold on. Oh, wow. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, yeah, so hello everyone. Yeah, so I'm Rob Cunningham. I work for the Nature Conservancy on the Resilient Watersheds Programme in Europe. And yeah, it's nice to see in the chat so many people I've worked with in the past, and yeah, it'd be really great to get your input following this, because this is a kind of a checkpoint for us to in anything we can learn and develop. And I think what's really key, we've had some messages in the chat about the kind of wider things out there: carbon, food production, kind of connections to other ecosystem services, conservation. I think what's just to kind of one of the things as we move to September, this program spent a lot of time looking really broadly about all the things that fit into the kind of water scarcity issues, water resource, water quality issues in Norfolk, and the connections of different things. And then what we're doing for September is converging on a kind of robust business plan on the things which we think are marketable here and now, and then building from that. So these are all brilliant suggestions, and if we can follow that up, that'd be great. So just thinking about kind of moving into the design, and we kicked around. So we've had the Norfolk Water Strategy, but the fund is a very discrete thing, and we're thinking about, so what's the vision? And the vision, as visions are, is much broader actually than the fund, because we see that what we want is Norfolk being a kind of centre for innovation, skills and learning, focused on nature-based solutions that protect the environment and underpin economic prosperity. And going back to Simon's question, I don't think we have in this slide deck really addressed the targeting and how we're going to take nature into account in terms of how we, filter, how we avoid going to the lowest common denominator and maximize the environmental benefits. But that is front of mind, because the Nature Conservancy, WWF, Anglian Water, we're not, I certainly don't get out of bed to deliver ecosystem services. I get out of bed to deliver nature conservation, and I think we do. That is something we're working on. So we definitely have a conversation about that outside here. In terms of the mission, the Norfolk Fund, it's all about investing in nature-based solutions at scale. And another really key guiding principle is keeping it as simple as possible. And that's something that, because as I said, what we want to get to in September is an investable proposition with clear markets. It's not ruling out that developing further in the future, but let's think about what we can do in September. So we've been thinking a lot, working with groups like the Wendling Beck Farmer and looking across the country at other pilots, thinking about nutrient neutrality and BNG. These are kind of regulated markets. And, with the Norfolk Water Fund, what role can we play? So we can see that there are farmers and landowners out there who will be key to delivery, and there are buyers. And we know for nutrient neutrality and BNG, there's a huge untapped demand. And when we're thinking about buyers, we're thinking about developers, but also actually the joint ventures. So the Norfolk environmental credits could also be buyers in this system. And what we've thought is that actually, we've seen that farmers, landowners are really concerned about the financial risk that they might be taking on, and they're very reluctant or unable really to raise the finance to move to a market project or program of interventions on their land. So we're looking to raise funding from impact investors to create repayable loans for feasibility and capital to help farmers and landowners over that. They can then sell the units. That creates a payment back to the farmers and landowners. We get a return on a repayment of our repayable loan plus a return, and the impact investor gets a return on their investment. And I think what's really key about this is that the fund isn't going to hold the credits generated. We don't want to intervene between the farmers, the landowners, and the buyers. What we're hoping to do is raise some finance from investors who are willing to hold the financial risk around the nature-based solutions, and the farmers and landowners will enter into a contract with the buyers, and they'll hold that kind of contractual risk around performance. But so we're not looking to intervene as the holder of the credits. And so if you think about what does the function of the fund, engaging with buyers, theoretically, if you look at my diagram, no, we don't, but we are, because we're starting small, and we're kind of correct as we move into full operational. Of course, we're talking to buyers about how the market's going to work, what the prices are, and kind of stimulating that kind of conversation and raising awareness. But really, what the key engagement is with the landowners, farmers, and crucially the intermediaries. So the likes of FWAG, the NFU, the CLA, they're all going to be agronomists. They're all going to be really key. Anyone who farmers and landowners listen to for advice around farm planning, income planning, all the rest of it. We'll definitely play a technical assurance role, because we're going to need some assurance before we put money into a scheme that it's going to work. We have contracting, raising the capital, feasibility, and delivery. And we're talking about monitoring. I've got legal compliance here, no, because the contract will be between the landowner and the buyer. They're going to have the contractual delivery, so they'll also have to show that they're delivering that. But we're definitely, that wider knowledge generation piece, definitely we're going to be in that space. The non-regulated market, and the biggest and what I mean by non-regulated, there's no statutory driver for this, and what Jack and Thomas and Lola have been talking about in terms of water resources is the key non-regulated market that we're looking at the moment. And we see a slightly different role for the Norfolk Water Fund here, because it's not a statutory market. We know there are corporates out there who are investing in water resources in Norfolk. Coca-Cola has done for a number of years, but we think there's a lot of untapped demand, and there's also benefits for abstractors, direct users of the water environment. So we're looking to kind of engage with buyers, potential buyers, try and generate them, stimulate the market, engage with farmers and landowners using the data that Jack's produced. And again, looking to impact investors to create that upfront financing package so that the farmers and landowners can deliver those verified ecosystem service benefits, the water resource benefits. Those buyers, the buyers then pay the fund for the services they've received, and we can provide a return to the impact investor. So we see ourselves as kind of being at the centre of that market. So we're seeking to generate demand from the beneficiaries, and we'll help coordinate that market. Now, that's our starter for this. I know the Rivers Trust, for example, are already engaged in replenish type water resource type activity, but what we want to do is kind of really stimulate that market. And so we have a slightly different set of requirements for the fund. And one of the things we've been considering is, what form should the fund take? So the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme is exactly that. It's a programme. It's hosted by Water Resources East and funded by the partners. As we move to a delivery mode and we start raising finance, there could be, Water Resources East. It may not be a suitable vehicle hosted by Water Resources East, or indeed any other body which has its own governance and its own board and its own risk appetite and all the rest of it. So we've been working very closely with Morrison and Foerster, and so big shout out to them for providing pro bono legal support to this program. And we asked them to kind of review the different structures, and they kind of came back and said, well, we think there should be a special purpose vehicle for the fund. They reviewed the different structures, the different pros and cons. I won't go into the details, but what they came back with was a proposal that a community interest company would be the way forward. And this is a legal entity structure which is already being used in the Wire flood risk program, for example, which so it's limited company but not for profit. You have to have a public good statement, so it has to be designed to operate for the public good. It can be attractive to philanthropic donors, but also can raise finance. So it's kind of, we're not there yet. We're not suggesting we're going to suddenly launch a community interest company, but as the fund hosted program grows and transforms into the Norfolk Water Fund, we're developing behind the scenes. We're developing the kind of agreements and legal structures around that, so we're ready to launch when we need to go. So that's the kind of financial side, and Luke set out the financial barriers. There's also a lot of informational barriers, and so we're developing this East of England planning hub with with Anglian Water, the Rivers Trusts, and the Cabba Group nationally. And it's going to be an open access platform, so we can assess the demand and opportunity for nature-based solutions. People can register projects, can assess, they can access the guidance, any case studies. So case study learning we're developing from the Wendling Beck, from the project at Crown Point, and also tools. So the stuff we're learning around from the bottom up, how does a farmer model the financial impact over 30 to 100 years, depending on which markets they're entering into. So we've developed those tools in real places. In the Wendling Beck, we're developing it at Crown Point. We will share the kind of core learning from that, so that farmers can take it and adapt it. So helping to get through some of those barriers and accelerate uptake. It'll also be a really transparent way for buyers to understand where projects are being developed. And this example just up here on the top right is nutrient neutrality demand. It was one of the bits of work that Jack did, and it kind of illustrates the relative demand for nutrient neutrality, and we'll be refining that so that people will have a very clear understanding around is there demand. If I'm selling it, will someone buy it? And that's a really key piece. And then in terms of registering projects, this is screenshot from an early the current kind of beta version with projects that were already registered. Not all of them are relevant. In fact, the vast majority of them aren't particularly relevant to water resources or nutrient neutrality, but they are projects being delivered around the east of England, and this portfolio will build over time. And this is how we think it. This is the kind of plan for how it will work. So the land managers and their intermediaries can kind of access the data to understand where the demand is. They can have a look at the kind of more detailed, granular data to work out where the opportunity is. So where the physical characteristics of their land mean that they can deliver against that demand. They'll be able to register where their interventions and their projects are. So if they're thinking of, say, a wetland or a buffer strip, they'll be able to draw that onto the into a form which can be uploaded. And that would be the kind of registering their interest, and we'll be able to track that project development through updates on the portal, so that we create this fundable project pipeline. And I think it's really clear that this is completely open access. Everyone can see this. So the Norfolk Water Fund will be able to evaluate those early project proposals and will fund the ones which it thinks meet the right criteria to go through that feasibility and design. But if the joint venture or indeed a private developer spots a project which they think looks interesting, then provided the land manager or the intermediaries are willing to have put up their contact details and willing to be approached, there's no reason why that couldn't happen. And it's really important, like there's loads and loads of there's lots of failed web tools out there, and it's really, I just wanted to kind of say that actually there's a whole ecosystem of support that sits around the web tool. So we're going to be reliant on some of you out there on this call in helping kind of raise awareness, giving us feedback, helping us refine those tools, giving us pilot studies and things that we can add into the guidance and advice, and engaging with landowners, engaging with funders, just so that we can actually make this thing live and breathe and develop into a really useful tool. What we don't want it to be is a kind of a pretty thing that actually no one uses. So it's much more than just a visualization tool. It's much more than just a layer of data, sets of data. And so that's how we see project generation, project funding working. In terms of monitoring, evaluation, and learning, it's one of those things. Everybody says, "Oh yes, we should definitely do this." It can be incredibly expensive, and in this cartoon they say 10% of operating budget. It could be significantly more than that. I think what we're trying to do as we develop our monitoring and evaluation and learning strategy is think about what actually, what the requirements are. And going back to the comments earlier that Jack made earlier, we know there'll be a significant baselining exercise needed for some of these interventions, some of these nature-based solutions, and that's going to require some upfront funding. And the answer might be, well, actually the water quality is already really good, so there's no point putting a nature-based solution. So there's a risk to that. So we need to think about, that needs to be part of the upfront funding, but it does come at a risk. There'll definitely be contractual monitoring and evaluation around demonstrating you delivered what you said you'd deliver, where there's an allowance, where you're doing interventions where a degree of benefit is allowed to be claimed up front for nutrient neutrality. So we know, for example, that treatment wetlands will fall, because there's some guidance has been issued that they fall into that category. So that can be captured in the overall project cost, but which definitely needs to be captured, because it won't be immaterial. It will be significant. And then we come into this kind of wider nature-based solutions performance, and what the wetland guidance and what we've been told is that actually, if told by Natural England, that actually if we can demonstrate that NBS are delivering more than the initial allowance, that could lead to an additional kind of claim of or additional generation of credits. it still requires upfront funding, and but there is a potential for a return, but it's absolutely not guaranteed. And also, there'll be a whole bunch of NBS where actually the current science hasn't led Natural England to conclude that you can claim upfront benefits. So each one of those will require a bespoke baselining and a bespoke performance assessment before credits can be claimed for nutrient neutrality. So again, it's going to be a lot of upfront funding required, not necessarily going to get a return if that doesn't work out, or if the credits you generate aren't enough to cover the cost of delivery and monitoring. And then going, to the points Simon made around the wider benefits, absolutely, there's a whole bunch of wider environmental, social, and economic benefits that aren't going to be part of the marketable kind of value. And we want to develop that understanding. We want to build the evidence base so we can deliver more nature-based solutions. There's absolutely no direct route to create returns for that. So we have to look at we'll have to look at other sources of funding. And very final thing on monitoring, what I would say is that all of this monitoring around nature-based solutions, performance, and wider environmental, social, and economic benefits isn't just for the benefit of the Norfolk Water Fund and people who are and people who use the finance facility that we're looking to offer. Is actually it's open source. It benefits everyone, and so I think we have to think about how we create a Norfolk-wide strategy with all the actors who have an interest in this, investing in really robust, comparable monitoring and evaluation. And I think that fits into that wider vision about Norfolk becoming a place, a centre of excellence. But I think we're going to have to collaborate on that, and I think there's some ideas around that. But I think it would be great to bring that conversation out. And that's me done.
Fantastic, Rob. Thank you so much. Got some questions, but we've got a little bit of time for a few more if people have any burning issues they want to raise through the chat. So one question was it from Ian Robinson. I guess it also follows up on your question earlier about some of the water level management plans being out of date, and water level management being so important for carbon in particular. And you mentioned that IDB managed water is a potential untapped resource. And I don't know, maybe Luke, is there anything more to say about how we're working with IDBs about potential opportunities to maybe capture, infiltrate some of the water which ordinarily might be pumped into rivers and then flow out to sea? You're on mute there, Rob. Luke, sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I guess to answer the first part of the question, I think it's probably fair to assume some of the returns from the likes of IDBs probably is captured in a lot of the gauge data that we've used in some of the modelling. We might have to defer to Jack to clarify some of that. Yeah, I mean, I think the IDBs are absolutely a tapped of a source of untapped knowledge in terms of how water moves in the catchments, and as I think as we all collectively know, models only get you so far, and typically all are wrong, but some are useful. So yeah, we've had some really good discussions with the IDBs, and they've actually got a lot of appetite to deliver similar kind of projects on the ground. That they really do understand the waterways and the landowners really well. So so yeah, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, no, say there's lots of interest in all of this. No doubt people have heard of the Felixstowe Hydrocycle project, which we had a presentation on just yesterday from John Patrick, who is the kind of architect of that, Sustainable Water Solutions, a little plug for them, and he chaired the East Suffolk Water Abstractors Group. But it's not just about the hydrocycle bringing IDB water back into the catchment, but also they've been testing the potential for managed aquifer recharge, where with Environment Agency approval, allowing water to naturally infiltrate or semi-naturally infiltrate back into a suitable kind of craggy aquifer for extraction later on in the year. And I guess, could you call that nature-based solution, but it certainly helps with flows. And it's the kind of project that landowners might be willing to invest in, given the kind of the value of water that is increasingly going to be important for agriculture in Norfolk. Adam, I guess back to you, perhaps, Rob. Is there a role for the Water Fund to act as a credit aggregator, where buyers don't necessarily want to deal with multiple delivery partners? I guess that's probably one of the core tenets of the fund.
Yeah, I think we've been quite cautious about holding statutory credits. So I think where I see aggregation happening is at the project development level, because the kind of contractual arrangements around and legal kind of implications of holding nutrient neutrality credits or BNG just could sink us in terms of the amount of overheads that we would have to, and we'd spend all our time negotiating legal things, and whereas actually stepping out of the way. So the way I envisage that aggregation happening is through supporting people to develop high quality projects and signposting and supporting them in identifying all of the different credits in which they could different income streams they could generate. That might be suboptimal, but I think at the moment in terms of a buyer, but I think at the moment it's probably the only realistic way we can operate.
And just with Tom on the call from Norfolk Environment Credits, so I mean, just say more about the relationship, I suppose, between the Norfolk Water Fund and the joint venture for nutrient neutrality.
Sorry, Daniel, was that a question for me?
Sorry, for Rob, actually, just to see it from your perspective, first of all.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. I thought it was. So from my perspective, I think we essentially the credit the joint venture could be a buyer for the projects that we develop, but actually also I think there's a conversation which we haven't really had in any detail around actually as I said, the hub and the monitoring are both things which essentially are generating nature-based solutions projects, and the information that's generated is open to everyone. So that pipeline of projects doesn't have to be funded through the Norfolk Water Fund if other funders are available. I think where we see our particular USP is around the risk element, the developing new ideas, and also the developing schemes with a particular focus on the wider environmental benefits. So I think there will be some landowners and some buyers who will be particularly interested in transacting with us because we have a slightly different offer. But ultimately, if the joint venture wishes to use the information generated on the hub to identify potential projects and have one-to-one discussions with those people, I mean, the ultimate aim of all of this is delivering more high-quality nature-based solutions.
Yeah. Well, I'll bring you in, Tom, if you want to say, just to, if that accords with your view of the world. And certainly, as Rob says, we're not trying to corner the market here. There'll be lots of other trades and transactions hopefully happening. But what we're trying to make sure that it happens, and we all want the same outcome in terms of environmental improvement. This is a means by which we can hopefully scale projects that might not otherwise take place. But Tom, did you want to say any more from your perspective?
No, I think I called with Rob's comments really around that. It needs to be a mixed economy, doesn't it? And it'll be horses for courses. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, the JV has an opportunity to play that sort of interface between mitigation providers and developers, and help with those transactions. Again, with the relationships with local planning authorities there as well. But I think there's a great opportunity there to work collaboratively together to deliver good solutions and deliver sustainable housing across Norfolk. So
yeah, perfect, thank you. So Rob, Ian also asked a question about whether the East of England Planning Hub portal could be used for larger areas. So you had lots of dots all over the place, but some of the landscape recovery bids cover very huge areas. Is that part of the plan as well?
Yes. So that's just a screenshot of the functionality as it is now. The way the hub's envisaged is you'll be able to you'll drop a pin and say this is a project. The project will have an area associated with it, but within that, individual interventions can then be mapped. So and we're working. I mean, I'm not, anyone who knows me will know I'm not a GIS whiz. So we're working with people who are to work out what the art of the possible is. But in essence, what you'll be able to do is, yes, you'll be able to enter a project of any scale, and then within that, put specific or discrete land parcels or subland parcels linked to specific interventions. It's also worth saying that we're working with the Rivers Trust and CABA because because we have a joint interest in developing this, but actually this is a model which is being developed to be rolled out nationally. So similar hubs are in development, but ultimately we're looking to, what the Rivers Trust are looking to create a common platform and common set of functionality.
I'd say we've got Sam Westwood from Anglian Water, who's on secondment to the Rivers Trust, as I understand, to help build that planning hub. So he's
the GIS whiz I rely on. Yes.
Right, that's brilliant to say. This is all tied together. When we're talking about these projects, we're working with Anglian Water really closely, working with Norfolk County Council on the local nature recovery strategy. And just to plug again, I'm so grateful for the support, particularly for Norfolk County Council and Anglian Water, who've agreed in principle to fund the project for the next 12 months. Which is obviously a really important part of the project, because we can only get projects to the stage of being market ready, investable, if somebody is willing to put the funding up front to fund the team's time that have been talking today, and to get projects to that point. So I think probably we should just draw things to a close. We've just got a couple of minutes just to kind of summarize where we are. Luke, do you want to just share your screen in terms of looking ahead? I mean, hopefully it's been an interesting session for you all to just talk you through very briefly all the massive progress that's been made behind the scenes by the team since we had a kind of formal kind of progress report, say last summer. We had an in-person event. We've had webinars since, but we are planning to have another in-person launch event in September, where we will formally kind of present the business case for nature-based solutions in Norfolk to you, and some kind of launch to kind of generate interest both from more landowners and also for more funders to be able to start to make this market come together. You see on the screen Luke's details as program manager, so please do get in touch with Luke about any aspect of the work that you've heard today. He'll obviously then bring in the wider team if the questions are for others. And also Water Resources East central inbox if there's anything you want to follow up about Water Resources East's role in this. So you should hopefully get invites coming through for that launch event in Norfolk in September. But of course, that's just an important milestone through to the next kind of 12 and 18 months, which we're kind of seeing as a kind of launch and scale phase, where we'll be mobilising the governance, potentially launching that special purpose vehicle, a community interest company that Rob touched upon, scaling those fundraising activities, bringing in the kinds of finance that Lola talked through, and in particular tying in very closely with those other major programmes and activities underway within Norfolk. So we mentioned Anglian Water a number of times as a key funder for this work, but the water industry National Environment Programme, which Anglian Water is building now for the next 5 years, is absolutely aligned with what we're trying to do. Hopefully that programme will be more outcome focused, more nature based. So again, we're really working very closely with Anglian Water on that. And we mentioned the local nature recovery strategies a number of times, which again, guidance from government, from Natural England, is for those objectives for our kind of habitat restoration and environmental improvement to be delivered as much through the water environment as it is through terrestrial species, biodiversity and habitats. But so we really want to use the local nature recovery strategy as a vehicle for improving those river water outcomes, to turn rivers back to good ecological status, and to do that as fast as possible in nature-based way. So things are coming together really nicely. Hopefully it's been a useful session for you all. As we said throughout, the webinar recording will be posted to Water Resources East's website, as will the slides. So feel free to publicise that through your own networks, and to kind of pass the recording and the slides on to anybody else who couldn't make it today. So thank you again to all our speakers, particularly to Luke and to the team from Nature for Water and the Nature Conservancy, to Anglian Water and Norfolk County Council as our funders, together with WWF, who is supporting us in lots of different ways, and is again a key funder for some of our projects getting underway. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thanks all. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.